Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a neighbor trespassed on my land repeatedly and then built a shed on my property. He now claims he is the owner of my property. Here is what happened to this dumb thief. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. My wife and I have worked for a major portion of our lives just so we could save up enough money to own a huge house complete with a spacious front yard. We have each spent so much time in the office, but it was all worth it when we finally saved up enough to be able to purchase our dream home, and the best part was that it was just a 5-minute walk to the beach from our front door. The first time we met was at the beach when we had both signed up for the same marathon, so beaches have always been special to us. She is an attorney and I have always had massive respect for her. She is usually busy with important cases, so I try not to bring up minor inconveniences. This was the sole reason I had not mentioned anything about our annoying neighbor Jackson, who initially seemed harmless, but I soon grew to regret that. We bought the land that our new house stands on from this grumpy old man, although, to be fair, he actually seemed nice in the beginning. My wife made sure all the documents were in order before we signed it, and she even double-checked because we were only buying half of his property from him. He had his land divided into two parts. One half was where our house that we purchased was, and the other half was the house that he was living in. The first sign of the problems that lay under the exterior of a short old man was when he had aggressively yelled at my wife's assistant when she was running late to sign the document that finalized the transaction. I should have realized then that something was off with our soon-to-be neighbor, but by the time she reached us, he had gone back to being calm and normal. There were no other issues during the whole process of acquiring a new property. We had a whole month of peace and absolute bliss after having lived out our dream. Our other neighbor Harry, who stayed right next to us, felt like a brother from another mother, and naturally I grew very close to him in a very short period of time. He would come over to watch every important baseball game, and I would go over every Sunday to barbecue whatever we caught from our fishing trips. Like I said, our life finally seemed to be perfect after all the work we had put in to get here. Our problem started on the day that Jackson decided he wanted to reclaim our front yard. I had just come back from work when I saw him in our yard with a measuring tape. He was holding the tape all wrong and managed to cut his finger right when I had entered the gate. I rushed over to check on him, but he seemed agitated and yelled at me for patronizing him. He went on to say that the front yard was not part of the deal, so he was going to build a shed here to store his gardening tools. I tried arguing, but every time I said anything at all, he would yell louder and cut me off. He stopped speaking abruptly and claimed it was his dinner time and stormed out. I was shocked by this encounter and stood there trying to figure out what had just happened. After a little contemplation, I remembered he was just an old man living all alone in his large house. I would seldom see him leave his house, and that had to have been maddening. He would have a middle-aged man and a slightly younger woman drop by often, and I assumed they were his children, but it made sense that he still craved attention. I had decided that this was why he chose to create a scene in front of my house, and that this would probably not happen again. However, I was wrong. I told Harry about the incident and he did not seem surprised at all. Apparently, it was very common for Jackson to get into a row with many of the residents in our area. He pretty much only stepped out of his door to yell, and the most interesting part was that it was not because of his age. He had moved in around 30 years back, and it seemed everyone had multiple stories of conflicts with this man throughout this time period. And it was not just him, his children and his wife were the same way. He had destroyed one of Harry's grills back when they were immediate neighbors because he hated the smell of barbecue. Harry would have been fine with not using it, but the old man never said anything initially and just went on to break the grill. His unreasonableness had only gotten worse after the death of his wife. I made a mental note to keep my guard up and decided to get my house fenced. The construction process took a week, and obviously, Jackson did not stay quiet. He kept raising complaints and said it is his property, so I cannot fence it, but I brushed off his words. I had not mentioned any of this to my wife because I did not think his threats would amount to anything, but she found out the real reason our house was getting fenced when halfway through the process. Jackson walked through the part that was still being constructed and began digging up the front lawn. I stopped him immediately and asked him to leave. My wife came up to us too, but he just went on about how this was still his property and how he needed to build a tool shed right in front of our house. This enraged her as well, and soon a full-blown argument was underway. The noise was enough to bring Harry and the other neighbors to our lawn, who convinced Jackson to leave. My wife immediately began getting all the documents related to the property in case he pulled another stunt like this, but in the following days nothing of the sort had happened. It was a week after the fence's construction was done when we heard a loud roaring sound in the middle of the night that we saw him again. He stood by the fence manically with a rusty chainsaw and took down the posts. We rushed to him to get him to stop, but he pulled out a revolver and threatened to fire at me if I didn't step back. I was completely panicked from having an unstable old man point a gun at me, but my wife stayed calm. She coaxed me to get back in, and we both watched from the window as Jackson destroyed post after post the whole night. The documents proving that the land is ours and footage from the street cameras was all my wife needed to be able to sue Jackson, as well as getting a restraining order. The footage also had him destroying the fence, and he was forced to pay us twice the amount for damages. The worst part was that his children still believed he was right and tried to claim in court that the area that was fenced still belonged to their father, but there was overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Luckily, Jackson decided to move in with his son after the restraining order was passed, and everyone in the neighborhood felt relief. And yeah, ripe stars, I cannot imagine living next to a neighbor such as Jackson. That would probably drive me absolutely insane. Have you ever dealt with such a neighbor? Let us know in the comments, and now let's continue with the next story. And the next one is titled, Karen Tried to Steal the Truck. Not my story. For starters, my friend owns a blue 05 Dodge Ram 1500. It is not the most reliable model of truck, but he has kept it in damn good shape and left it looking stock, save for some aftermarket alloy wheels. He tells me he was willed the truck from his grandfather when he passed away 7 years ago. Caleb is not a mechanic, but learned how to do a lot of work on this truck by himself. I even helped him redo the undercoating on it and buff polished the paint. This story takes place around 3 years ago. My friend tells me this was really the one and only time he has dealt with an entitled parent. He described her as looking like a teapot, short and stout. So from this point on, the EM will be referred to as Teapot, and for the sake of giving him a name, my friend in the story will be referred to as Caleb. Or Caleb, I'm not sure. Either way, rewind 3 years and our story begins at a local supermarket whose name rhymes with Stall Mart. Caleb always goes out of his way to try and get as close of a parking space to the store as possible. And on this day, he managed to do so. He went in and did the bulk of his food shopping for the next couple of weeks, and everything seemed fine. But of course, now comes the enter Karen part of this story. Caleb was pushing his cart out when he saw an older woman trying to force open the rear door of the canopy on his truck. Which is odd, because you could clearly see inside that he did not really have anything of value in it other than a few tools. She did not seem to notice him until he was super close and said to her, "Excuse me? What are you doing?" Teapot jumped back like lightning struck, but then quickly started playing the little old lady card, though this woman was about 50 tops. She put her hand over her heart and said in an over-exaggerated way, "Oh dear, you shouldn't sneak up on people like that, young man." Caleb, "Yeah, sure." "What are you doing?" Teapot, "I was just trying to get in my truck. I locked my keys inside by mistake and cannot get in." Caleb, "Lady, that's not your truck." Teapot, "Yes, it is. I just got it last year." Caleb, "Oh really? Then what model year is it?" Teapot, "It's a 2010. Just look at how clean and new it looks." Caleb, "No lady, it's an 05. I know this because it's my truck." Caleb then produced the keys and pressed the button on the fob to unlock the door. He said Teapot first went white and then red with anger. It's pretty much full stereotypical Karen after this. Teapot, listen here, you little crap. You don't deserve a truck this nice. It would be a lot better for someone like my son. He is a local college student, you know, and he needs a nice shiny vehicle like this to get around in. Caleb, are you loopy, lady? My truck is not for sale, and even if it was, how much would you give me for it? Teapot started to look smug and pulled a checkbook from her purse. I can give you $1,500 for it right now. Caleb facepalmed so hard he said he hurt his nose. Lady, my truck is worth several times that. And I've personally kept up with its maintenance for several years. There's no way in hell I would take $1,500 for it. Plus, there's no way I would hand over the title unless I was paid with cash. I don't trust checks. Teapot moved to get up in his face, which was funny because he was a full foot taller than her. She was about to speak when Caleb silenced her with a loud, "Don't even think about it, lady. My truck is not yours for the taking." "It never will be. Now leave me alone so I can unload my groceries in peace and go home." He then did his best to try and ignore Teapot as she began screaming and saying she would call the police. Caleb then just yelled back, "Call them then." And she actually did. She pulled out an old flip phone and began fake crying while speaking with the person on the other end. Caleb finished loading his groceries and locked the truck because he was not about to drive off with police on their way. When the police arrived, Teapot actually flopped down onto the ground and started fake crying like a baby while flailing her arms and legs around and pointing at Caleb screaming. "He knocked me to the ground and stole my truck, and then he said he would come back later and hurt my family. Arrest him now!" The two police officers that had showed up were an older man with a mustache and a younger one that Caleb said he guessed was a rookie because the younger cop was immediately getting ready to aim his taser when the older one stopped him so they could assess the situation first. Caleb raised both hands and calmly stated that nothing Teapot said was true, and that she had been harassing him since he caught her trying to break into his truck. Teapot, while still having a tantrum on the ground, yelled, "He is lying! Arrest him!" The rookie officer spoke with Teapot while the mustached one spoke with Caleb. Since he was so close to the store, Caleb stated that he bet that the security cameras picked up the whole thing. It was at that point that Teapot gave up on her act and started screaming like a banshee while running at Caleb with a small pocket knife she had pulled out from her purse. Caleb tried to back away and held his hands up, and the knife went right through his left palm, which he described to me as one of the most painful things he had ever felt. She pulled the knife out and tried to stab him again when the rookie tackled her to the ground and tased her. Teapot flailed around and started screaming and sobbing like a baby. When she finally stopped moving, the mustached officer cuffed her while the rookie called for an ambulance. Teapot was loaded into the police cruiser, kicking and screaming, "Help! Police brutality! Someone help me!" Caleb was taken to the hospital to tend to the stab wound in his hand. Turns out he was incredibly lucky as the knife had gone right between the bones and not damaged any tendons. Later in court, Teapot actually tried to plead not guilty, but the evidence against her was overwhelming and she was charged with attempted murder, attempted grand theft auto, and a few other things. The judge sentenced her to be put in a mental facility because she clearly was not well. As soon as that happened, Teapot flipped out and began trying to charge at the judge. However, she was quickly grabbed by the guards and hauled out of the courtroom. Also, during the trial, Caleb met Teapot's son. Turns out he had gone no contact with her as soon as he was old enough to move out because she was the most controlling and overbearing mother you could imagine. And ever since then, she had been trying to show up at his apartment and bring him nice things he suspected she had just stolen to try and get him to talk to her. Guess she figured Caleb's truck would have gotten her back in her son's good graces or something. This story is getting written now because Caleb decided to check up on Teapot by searching her name online. She is still at the mental facility, and he found out from her son through social media that she looks to likely be staying there for quite some time to come. And yeah guys, I honestly almost feel sorry for the woman in the story because she clearly has mental issues, and I hope she now gets the help that she needs. However, imagine how scary that would be in real life when someone charges at you with a knife. Absolutely insane. Either way, the next one is titled, "When Petty Revenge Goes Too Far." This is a story of what I am sure was meant to be petty revenge against me that backfired spectacularly. I used a pet sitting company last month that, after I was back from my trip, tried to get me to pay another almost $50, citing that they had not added the surcharge for bank holidays, and tried to guilt me into paying immediately or else they would not be able to do payroll. The only problem with that is that they had already increased the price once before the visit for the exact same reason. When I questioned how it was possible, they broke the charges down, revealing that they were trying to charge me a higher daily cost than I had agreed to. I responded with the original invoice I had signed detailing the cost. Told them I did not appreciate them trying to guilt me into overpaying and that I considered this matter over. I then gave them a 3-star review on Google and Trustpilot detailing this experience. I still gave them 3 stars because after the exchange it seemed like they were just incompetent rather than malicious, and the cat sitter themselves were good and they saw the review, responded that it was completely unnecessary and that it was all a big misunderstanding, and then they sent me a couple of emails privately calling me rude things. I just screenshotted the emails, attached them to the review and changed it down to 1 star. I can only assume they read this subreddit or something similar, as they decided to do what a lot of people have done here and give my contact details out to random companies. The only difference is they did not stick to mailing lists, they actually contacted companies using my details. They have tried to take out loans, applied for university courses and made bookings for various things like gyms, tutors and solicitors. In my country, this constitutes as identity theft, and given that so far they have contacted 33 companies over the span of a week, it's quite a severe case. And while companies may not record many details of how someone signs up for a newsletter, a lot of them, particularly the solicitors, capture a lot more about requests to their site. For example, an IP address, which just so happens to be the same IP that was used to view my signed invoice on the same day the crime started. They are now being investigated by the Cyber Crimes Division of my local police for the identity theft as well as identity fraud for trying to get loans opened in my name. So, folks, when you're committing petty revenge, make sure you don't go overboard and don't do it during business hours on the computer you use for work. Update to the story, new moral of the story: who cares if you break the law because the cops certainly don't. Despite all of my evidence, I had more than listed above, I just didn't want to publicly air everything in case the person who did this found the post. The police have said that there is not enough information to open a case and that since they did not actually succeed at the fraud, there is no point pursuing this further. So, go wild, folks. If the cops in your area are anywhere near as lazy as incompetent as in mine, you will never face any consequences for your actions. And wow, ripe stars, that is actually unbelievable how incompetent the police is in this story. And also how malicious this company is. That's why you always sort of need to be careful who you give your personal information to, although you would not expect a company to do this. Anyway, if you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate if you could like it because that would help me tremendously. Thank you very much for watching, I hope to see you again tomorrow.